Hi everyone, Woniya here with Buckskin Revolution, talking about my 10 items that I brought on Alone Season 6. So I already talked about my first 4 items, my ferro rod, my multi-tool, my knife, and my saw on part 1. So this is part 2, and I'm going to talk about the paracord, fishing line, and the most important thing in my world out there, my pemmican. So I want to start by talking about my fishing line. Now, this is one of the only items that I never considered not bringing. Great Slave Lake, known as Kunede or Tunede in Dene, is a world-renowned fishing location. So I never questioned that fishing line and hooks was absolutely essential. Turns out, of course, I would have been far better off with snare wire, but, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and I ended up learning how to snare well with fishing line. Not as well as had I had snare wire, but given the circumstances, I did pretty well with it. So I took a variety of different sizes and different colors and circle and standard shaped fishing hooks. So I also turned a lot of those into lures using bright colors from my paracord, using wool from my sweater, and using a Pepsi can that I found. So I had fishing line and lures. So we were allowed a total of 300 yards of fishing line, and it had to be monofilament. We were not allowed braided Kevlar or any other type of line, and it could only be as strong as 20-pound test. So rather than just buying whatever I could get my hands on, I did some research and particularly talked to a fisherman friend of mine who has done some strength trials, because it turns out not all 20-pound test is equivalent, right? Some 20-pound test breaks at 20 pounds of tension. Some breaks at 15, some breaks at 30. So I was recommended this brand, P-Line Extra Strong. And this is 20-pound test, but actually functionally it's much stronger, about 30 pounds of tension it can hold. So this is what I went with, and I brought moss green because I was in a lake, and I brought 250 yards of this. So I also wanted to bring a less strong, thinner line because I wanted to make sure that I had the ability for my line to break if it got snagged so that I wouldn't lose the entire line. So I used 12-pound test as the leader, so that was attached to the end of my line so that if I got snagged, that part could break and I could pull in my long length of my 20-pound test. Also, I brought about 20 yards of a hard bite leader. So originally I was thinking that I would use snare wire for a bite leader because those fish in that lake are huge with really sharp teeth. So they can bite through, especially something like 20-pound test. So you want to have a harder bite leader on it where the fish's teeth are going to be. So because I didn't end up bringing snare wire, I brought a monofilament, hard, non-flexible bite leader. So that was my fishing rig. The bite leader, and then the 12-pound test, and then the 20-pound test. And then I had weights attached to the 20-pound test to keep my bait down. And then I developed floats to keep it up so that it wouldn't go so far down where my hooks would get snagged and I would have to break the line. So that was my fishing setup. All of it was P-Line brand besides the monofilament, and I honestly don't remember the brand, and I don't have that anymore. I never ended up getting any fish, so that monofilament didn't help me. And I didn't use the 12-pound line for very much besides some crafting activities, like when I made a squirrel trap and I put nooses on that to catch the squirrel's hands, and I talk about that in my crafting on Alone video. So that is about the only time that I used the 12-pound test. But the 20-pound test was key for my snaring. So my original plan had been to bring snare wire, but at the last minute, I changed my mind and I brought paracord instead. And that was a choice made based on the shelter and the gill nets I was picturing, and all of the things I felt like I could do with paracord. And the winds were so intense that I knew that trying to use snare wire as cordage, particularly for my shelter, Snare wire, it flexes a few times and then it breaks. So that's why I made this choice. And there's no way for me to know how much better off I would have been with snare wire instead of paracord and fishing line for my snares. I suspect I would have done much better and had a lot more game and been able to stay out there a lot longer, which would have been amazing. That said, you know, I have no regrets. I had an amazing time out there. I learned so much. I was really successful given my spot and given my materials with snaring. So what more could I ask for? Maybe had I taken something different, something else would have happened and I would have regretted that, you know? So hindsight is 20/20, and I feel like I made the best choices I could have given the information I had going in. So that said, I brought paracord, and I believe we got to have 80 meters of paracord, and I brought a variety of different colors of it. So I brought some straight black and some army green for paracord that would blend into the background for trapping and snaring purposes. And then for places where I wanted visibility or where it didn't matter, I brought a flame design, so it was oranges, reds, and yellows. So I wanted something that was going to be, one, very easy for me to see so I wouldn't lose it, and then something that was attractive to me. I was going to be staring at it an awful lot. So flame colored, and then I also brought a long strand, maybe 20 feet, of hot pink, again for visibility, and I used this to mark my traps. So I had, you know, as many as 30 snares out. So sometimes I would hang a piece of that bright pink so that they were easy to see from a distance and easy to see whether they had been sprung. I also brought the pink specifically to represent my friend Kate, who was with us in the selection process and who I met at boot camp and didn't end up getting selected for the show. So that hot pink paracord was for practical purposes and also for Kate. So the way I used my paracord out there was for some purposes where I needed a lot of strength. I would sometimes use the entire width of the paracord, but mostly I was doing what I called skinning the paracord, where I was pulling the inner strands out from the outer sheath. Now each inner strand is a 35-pound test. They're quite slender, but quite strong. And when I tied all of those together and wound them around a spool, it meant I had a lot of length of paracord. And then the outer sheath is about 250-pound test. So it's very strong. So for some trapping purposes, like pulling down really strong spring poles, I would use that outer sheath, or for other shelter prep purposes, I often use that outer sheath. And then I had the inner sheath for all of the other things, all kinds of lashing. A lot of work on my shelter was done using those inner sheaths, and a lot of my trapping was inner sheaths. So super useful, and by separating those, I had 8 times more cordage than just the 80 meters. So it was super, super useful, and as much as I sometimes wished I had snare wire, man, it was wonderful having the paracord. Really, really useful stuff. So that is that item, which brings us to the little bit of gold that is in this jar. So it's a hard choice, right? Because if you take a food ration, then you're not taking some other tool that could potentially bring you more food than that ration. That said, pemmican is like magic out there. We were given a list of all of these different food rations that we could choose from as one of our 10 items, and they were biltong, or jerky, which is going to be a dried lean meat, or gorp, raisins, peanuts, and chocolate, or straight up chocolate, 2 pounds of chocolate, or hardtack, which is a cracker, or legumes, so dried beans, or a mix of flour, sugar, and salt, or pemmican. To my mind, the only one of those that makes any sense to bring is the pemmican. Jerky, lean meat, is mostly what you're going to have out there, so why bring as your one food item the one thing that you're most likely to encounter out there? Both the hardtack or the chocolate or the beans are going to have a lot of hard carbohydrates, which is going to keep you from going into ketosis, which is the most efficient metabolic state. So it's definitely what you want to be in, and you don't want to do anything to delay you going into ketosis. So the gorp is going to have a little bit of fat, but not compared to the pemmican. So pemmican is a mixture of fat and dried meat and dried berries. So it has vitamins from the berries, protein from the meat, and a lot of fat, which means in those 2 pounds, you're getting way more calories than any of the other rations, plus fat is everything out there. So I really think that the reason why I did so well on just rabbits and squirrels, which are incredibly lean, was because of the pemmican. So if you are up on survival and nutrition, you'll know there's a thing called rabbit starvation, which is basically you are poisoning your system with too much protein without any fat to process it. So your body needs fat to process proteins, and you can die of starvation with all of the squirrels or rabbits in the world. So having brought another tool which would help me get more game wouldn't have been as useful to me as this pemmican because it gave me fat. So I was able to render some fat out of the pemmican to cook my game in, so that every time I was eating that squirrel or that rabbit, I was getting a little bit of fat, and that was critical for helping my body process and digest and get the most out of that game. So yes, it was only 2 pounds of food, looked about like that going out, but it was like gold out there. I made those 2 pounds last my entire 73 days. So I would start, and early on I ate a little bit more of my rations than I had later because I knew my body was adjusting, and my plan was to focus a lot on shelter. So I brought the pemmican thinking that it was going to help me get through those times of building the shelter before I started really hunting in earnest. Well, it turns out big game or fish were not an option in my spot, right? So all I had was small game. So the pemmican I would have just a little bit of every few days, and I would use a little bit of the fat when I would cook my game. So it was absolutely key. And the very last morning, I had my last little ration of pemmican before they came and picked me up. So I made that stuff last, and it was not just the food value and the nutrition and helping me process the rabbit, also the moral support of knowing that I had some food was huge. It was absolutely huge. It was one of the ways that I marked special days, like every time I got to 10 marker, you know, day 50, day 60, day 70, I would let myself have a little bit of pemmican. I would mix it with berries to make the berries more palatable. I would have it when nothing else was coming in. It was just a little something to give my system to keep the cold from being as difficult, and just to have me feeling like I wasn't starving. It was something to look forward to, and my world hinged on that pemmican. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever eaten in my life. When I left to come back home, they sent me with a little container of the very same pemmican I had had out there, and I still have it. One little nibble of this pemmican brings me back to my peninsula like nothing else does. And I remember what every little mouthful, every little morsel meant to me out there. I intend to have pemmican on hand for everything I do from now on in my life. I now know that it is one of the most important things in the world. So, yes, it is hard to choose your 10 items, but future alone participants or anyone going into a survival situation or a wild foods adventure or even just camping or backpacking, may I recommend you learn to make amazing pemmican and take it with you everywhere, because it is absolutely the best stuff on earth. So I'll get down off of my soapbox, but a little plug for pemmican as the best thing going, and about the other items that I brought out with me on Alone Season 6. Thanks so much for watching, and check out my other videos on my YouTube channel about both my Alone experience and all of the other cool stuff that I do. And then there's more information about that and some of my books and the tools that I offer and classes that I teach on my website, www.buckskinrevolution.com.